Well, good morning again. For those of you who weren't here last week, I'm Rolf Jacobson from Luther Seminary, and I'm here to talk about humor and Christian faith. So I made a few points last week just to recover a couple of them as we start. First of all, that humorists, the first thing we can learn about Christian faith is that just as humorists look at the world differently, Christians look at the world differently. As an example, I thought I would pull up. I don't know if there's going to be any sound. If there isn't sound, it's not worth it, but let me see if this works.
You only go to a restaurant on the weekends, it gets busy, so they got to start a waiting list.
Hold on. Here. If I do this, can you hear?
Start calling out names. They say like,
That's all right. Go home. It's all right. Look for What About the Dufresnes, if you're interested. This is one where Mitch Hedberg, they're calling off waiting list in the restaurant. I talked about the joke last week. All right. But just like humorists look at the world differently, Christians should be looking for the Holy Spirit's work. I gave you an assignment. Did you see the Holy Spirit's work anywhere in the past week in the neighborhood?
I saw an orange car.
Saw an orange car. Yeah, I saw one pulled over on the highway today. Apparently, orange cars don't work as well. Well, it takes a long time to start to try to get your mind attuned to looking for evidence of the Spirit's work, because we've so trained ourselves to think that the Holy Spirit's work is inside the church building. Second of all, that just as humor is able to diagnose and show that the facade, the ideological facades of society are not true, right? This is where the Emperor Has No Clothes story by Hans Christian Andersen is so helpful. Theology, religion then, should be able to see past the ideological facades of the regime in order to see then, third, a different possibility, a different future. All right, and that's this point here. The third point, a different future is possible. I have this line on from Shakespeare. My favorite Shakespeare comedy is Twelfth Night, and the fool in Shakespeare's comedy, right? They see the truth, they tell the truth, and nobody else sees what's going on except the audience. And so when Fest says, "I wear not motley on my brain," he's saying, okay, the fool wears motley as a sign that they're not to be taken seriously. And of course, when he says, "But my brain doesn't wear it," that is, I actually do see the truth and bear witness to the truth. You hold on. I think that's just my computer. Oh.
Okay, good.
If I put it in the slideshow mode, it should help. Play from current slide. There we go. All right. All right. I got this far, right? Sorry. I was a little late this morning. And I talked about sarcasm, especially I talked about Amos and his sarcasm. I talked a little bit, I want to spend some time this morning, in fact. Let me see if this works. There. That's on purpose. That's the best key in PowerPoint is B, right? Because it makes the screen go black. So you can get the people's attention back. I want to take some time this morning looking at what I take to be the signature humor passage in the Bible, which is the story of Isaac's birth. Wow, that was nice. All right. Okay. I'm going to pull up my Bible here for just a minute. I think that's a little too loud. Oh, maybe that's only when I look down. I can't look down or it gets too loud. I think we all carry our Bibles now on our phones, which is more convenient, except for when you actually want to read it. Right? I know. It's true. All right, in Genesis 17, Abraham had laughed at God's promise, the renewed promise of the birth of a child. And Genesis 18 is Sarah's chance to laugh at the same promise. But your translations protect you. One point I made last week is that your translations protect you from what the Bible actually says sometimes. And it does so sometimes when the Bible is being funny. So the Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre as he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. He looked up and he saw 3 men standing near him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them. And he bowed down to the ground. And he said, "My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. Let me bring a little bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." So they said, "Go ahead." And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah, and said, Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it, and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant, who hastened to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared, and he set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. Two things about this passage so far that do not have directly to do with humor, but I think it's worth me taking a moment to point out. And the first thing is that the ancient Near East was a culture of hospitality to the stranger, especially because there were no restaurants or hotels. They didn't exist. And so when strangers passed through, the whole culture relied on people extending hospitality to strangers as they came through. So this was a normal event. However, what's not normal is the excess to which Abraham goes. So he doesn't just give them a little food. He gives them a calf, tender and good. That is veal, right? The calf that's up to a year old, veal, the most expensive part of raising sheep. And then he also, extends to them oil and bread and the hospitality to wash themselves. When Jesus, by the way, was about to be born, our old translations didn't know how to translate one word, so they translated it as inn. But there were no hotels or inns. The only other time in the Gospel of Luke that term is used, it means upper room. It's where the Last Supper happens, in the upper room. And so, because Israelite houses were 2-story affairs. And they were about 7 meters by 10 meters. On the bottom level, the first level, is where the animals and the storage was. Second level is where people slept. And third level was open air, where you'd sleep when it was hot, or there were certain other things that happened in the open air. So when they say there's no room for you in the upper room, there's no room. All the houses in Bethlehem were filled with extending hospitality to guests because of the census. So they slept where the animals slept on first floor. So it's still the same story, except it's not a stable somewhere else. It's you're sleeping with the animals. All right, back to Genesis. They said to him, "Where's your wife Sarah?" "There in the tent." Then one said, "I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah shall have a son." Now Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent behind him. All right, here's where the story starts to get good. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age, and had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. Y'all know what that means? Sarah was past menopause. So Sarah laughed to herself. Now, to herself. That's not what it says. What it says is Sarah laughed in her belly, which I take to mean two things. Not to herself, because they heard her. She had a great big roaring belly laugh. And of course, what part of her body was it that we're talking about that was her source of spiritual pain, right? It was her body, right? Her uterus in this case. So you're getting that reinforced. This is a belly laugh, calling also attention to the fact that she was childless. So Sarah laughed in her belly and said, "After I have grown old, and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure." So the word pleasure here is a word that can mean, right, sexual pleasure. After my husband has grown old. Do I have to explain that joke to you? They had not yet invented the little blue pill. So it's not just that Sarah's body is too old, it's that Abraham's body is too old. The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I'm old?' Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the set time, I will return to you in due season, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied it, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. And he said, "Oh yes, you did laugh." And they named the child Isaac. And the Hebrew word from which the name Isaac comes is, it's the word that means laughter, as I'm sure you've heard before. But that term also is a euphemism for sexual intercourse. So that Isaac later on, in the story of Isaac and Rebekah, 3 times in Genesis, there's a story that's called the endangered ancestress story. And it's where the wife of Abraham twice and Rebekah once goes into the harem of another king. Right? It happens in Genesis 12 when they go down to Egypt. And then it happens later with Isaac himself. And the king sees Isaac and Rebekah, and it's that same word. And the NRSV translates it something like fondling. But, again, because they're afraid they might offend their pious audiences, that word means having sex. All right? So the whole story in Genesis 18 here has these deep ripples of humor underneath it, all in order to set up the transformative birth of Isaac, the only begotten beloved son, whose name itself means laughter. I take this whole story as the paradigmatic story in the Old Testament raising the dead, which God does in the New Testament through the gift of life, the Son Jesus, born to a virgin, who was then later raised from the dead. If God had a business card, it would say something like, God turns the mocking belly laughter of Good Friday into the Easter laughter of new life, raises the dead. So this story, to me, is not simply one story in another. It's the story of laughter. It's the story that God exists to bring laughter, bring out the laughter of new life in communities of faith. I'll stop there in case anybody wants to leave, because the Bible talks about sex. Yep.
Brings a whole new meaning to my turning to my wife and saying, "You want a good laugh?"
I'm gonna leave that there. That's a good one. All right. I will return. There will be more. Here's what my problem is. I can't. Oh, there we go. If I do this, it's better. All right. All right, so we've been taught That's all right. I'll just read this. It's okay. You have to be prepared. We've been taught that communities of faith should be serious. So Bill Callen, a comedian, said, "I've been to church, I've read the Bible, never laughed once." In part because we've been taught the Bible's not funny. A very famous philosopher, Alfred North Whitehead, said about a century ago, "The total absence of humor in the Bible is one of the most singular things in all literatures." Now, he's wrong about there not being humor in the Bible, but I get it. The Rule of Benedict, which, St. Benedict creates the whole monastery system, which did so much to preserve literature in the West. But you were not supposed to laugh in the monastery. It says in the Rule of Benedict, "Do not speak words that are idle or suited to laughter. Buffoonery or words which are useless and provoke laughter, these we condemn with a perpetual ban. The disciple is not permitted to open his mouth for such conversation." Now, I want to point out that I think this is wrong. The reason Benedict condemns laughter is because he doesn't see any purpose in humor, so he says these words are useless. I think that's fundamentally wrong, but if you see it that way, or if you think humor is just an option, and you don't see how important it is for the health of an individual to laugh, for the health of communities to be able to laugh at themselves, you miss it. Now, in our Lutheran tradition, this became an issue among the Danes. The Danes of all people. Anybody here Danish? Partially Danish? Happy Danes or sad Danes?
It depends on what story you tell.
Okay, so in Denmark, there was a controversy among the Lutherans precisely over this issue. Whether the Christian life was a serious life of discipline in which laughter is not permitted, or whether the nature of the Christian life is the story of Isaac, the story that Jesus is raised from the dead, and this is a joyful reality. So among the happy Danes, literally at Christmas, around the Christmas tree, there was dancing, literally in congregations. Not so among the sad Danes. So, and you can still feel it when you go into a formerly Danish Lutheran church. These old cultures, they stick. So I know St. Peter's Lutheran Church in Minneapolis, that's Peter with a D. I used to go speak there once in a while. Those were the Happy Danes. And literally at Christmas, they danced around the tree. Luckily, among the rest of the Lutheran Church, as far as I know, no such split happened. I like this one. This is the only one I wish you could see, but I'll just read it to you. There's a Christian humor site called the Babylon Bee. Have you heard of this? So, BEE, the Babylon Bee. And they have funny stories. Mostly they're satire. It's mostly satire. For instance, were you aware about a month ago that a spiritual revival broke out at Asbury College and Seminary? Did you read about that? So after chapel one day, a few people just stayed to pray, and something happened there that they found spiritually renewing, and other people started coming, and this went on for 2 weeks. That round the clock, people stayed and prayed and sang, and the Babylon Bee had a story about it. It says that spiritual revival takes place at Asbury University the day before a group project was due. Right? That's the kind of humor you'll have on the Babylon Bee. And one year, you know those little hearts for Valentine's Day that don't taste good? What are they called?
Conversation hearts.
Conversation hearts? The Babylon Bee took phrases from the Song of Songs, right, which is an Old Testament love song, and they put it on they put it on the picture of the little hearts, and it says, "Hey, tower neck," or "Your teeth are sheep," "You have goat hair," and so on. So just imagine reading through the Song of Songs, and if we took those things, which were apparently romantic compliments in the biblical era, and put them on candy today. So I always like that joke. All right. So one of the places that you see the Bible's humor, and I want to look at it with you in a minute more, is in the prophets. It starts with the prophet Elijah. Do you remember the story of Elijah and the prophets of Baal? It's a story that we never read in church. I shouldn't say never. If you use the Revised Common Lectionary, then you never read it in church. You'd have to go to something like the Narrative Lectionary if you want to have this read in church. The Narrative Lectionary has it. It's an important story in the Old Testament. 500, or is it 400? It's either 400 or 500 prophets of Baal and one Elijah. And the whole thing is rigged. Elijah goes to their holy place, Mount Carmel, and Baal is the god of the thunderstorm. So whoever's God can call down lightning to consume the bull. And by the way, the bull was Baal's symbol. That's God. So the whole thing's rigged. One prophet against 400 or 500 on their home turf with their symbol, the bull, and their means, lightning. And they get to go first. And they go all day. And then Elijah at a certain point starts trash talking. So the prophets of Baal took the bull that was given them, prepared it, and called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, crying, "Oh, Baal, answer us." But there was no voice, no answer. They limped about the altar that they had made. At noon, Elijah mocked them. There we go. Here comes the trash talk. "Cry aloud. Surely he is a god. Either he is meditating or he has wandered away, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he's asleep and must be awakened. The wandered away is a euphemism for going to the bathroom. Maybe your God's out back. And by the way, I heard somebody talking about this. It was actually a comedian I was listening to this week saying he saw a dog going to the bathroom. That in itself is a euphemism. Literally, what does go to the bathroom mean? It means you go to a room in a house, right? Dogs don't do that. But so notice that we need euphemisms for these things. We need euphemisms for sexual activity. We need euphemisms for eliminating human waste. But Elijah's talking trash, and he says, maybe your God's out back in the outhouse. All right. Sometimes it's not that the Bible, there are other funny passages that I want to take you to in a minute, but sometimes it's not so much even about the Bible being funny, but us making the Bible funny. And the best combination of those two things is the book of Esther. I was going to pull this up, but I have to pull it up on my Bible. Give me a second. Have any of you ever been to the festival of Purim at a synagogue? So, in the Jewish liturgical year, there are 3 festivals, 2 high holy days, and then a bunch of other minor festivals. So the 3 festivals are Passover, Pentecost, and Pentecost is weeks, that's the same one. So weeks, meaning 7 times 7, a week of weeks, so therefore weeks. And of course, Pentecost means 50, right? 7 times 7 is 49, 50, close enough. And then in the fall, booths. So 3 major festivals, Passover, Pentecost, and booths in the fall. Then the 2 high holy days, which are always in the fall. Rosh Hashanah, meaning New Year's. Rosh, that means first of the year. And the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. Then there's other minor festivals throughout the year. One of them is the festival of Purim. And that is the day on which they read the book of Esther, which is the story of the final solution, where in exile, Haman, who is the non-Jew advisor to the king, and Mordecai, who is the Jewish advisor, Haman tries to get all the Jews murdered by the king. And so on the one hand, not a funny story, right? But on the other hand, the Jews make it funny. And what they do is on Purim, they dress in costumes. People come in ridiculous costumes. You can just Google this, Google costumes at Purim, Purim. And then they read through the book of Esther. And every time the name Haman is mentioned, it's a vaudeville show. They have rattles and other noisemakers, and they hoot and they howl, and they turn the whole thing into a joyous festival. And it's the one day of year that Jewish men, but all Jews, are encouraged to drink to excess. In fact, you're supposed to drink, it says in the Talmud, until you can't tell the difference. I can't remember. It's something like, till something you can't see straight, basically. So what are they doing? They're taking this story that does have certain comic elements. And they're making it extra funny by how they tell it, by telling it in a way that is full of laughter and full of regaling one another, and also a certain amount of alcohol. I was invited I'm getting old. It may already be 10 years, but I hope it wasn't that long ago. I was invited to a home of a Jew who follows Jesus. That's what he calls himself. He calls himself a Jewish follower of Jesus. Other traditional Jews would say, quit calling yourself Jewish. And he says, no, that's my heritage, that's my ethnicity is Jewish, but I follow Jesus. He leads a huge Bible study. I think that happens either weekly or monthly. On this particular day on Purim, he had, in town from New York was the president of the leading Jewish outreach to other Jews for Jesus. It's not Jews for Jesus, but so he invited a bunch of Christian leaders into his house for this occasion. And the joke was on me because some of these other Jewish Christian leaders came from pietist traditions that didn't drink alcohol. So even though it was Purim, there was no wine with dinner. I said, Tom, what's going on? He goes, I don't know, man. He goes, I don't want to offend anybody. All right, okay, Tom. So that story has no point. I'm just telling you. But it was interesting. The guy told the story of being in a Jewish neighborhood in New York on Purim, and he was walking along, and there were his fellow Jews dancing in the street, the men in their traditional garbs, with the ringlets, hair down next to their ears, and they said, "Hey, come dance with us." And he said, "No, come dance with us." And while they're dancing, they said, it comes out. He says, "I follow Yeshua," which is the Jewish name Joshua, which is the name Jesus. There are funny elements in the Esther story. One of the funny elements in the Esther story is the size of the gibbet that they have erected on which they're going to hang the Jews. And it's like 100 feet tall. It's similar to the statue in Daniel. It's way out of proportion to reality. And there's other elements in Esther that I've recently learned are also out of proportion and humorous. All right. So I'm trying to make 2 points here this morning. One is that there is humor in the Bible, but that oftentimes the translators either conceal it from us, or second of all, because humor, as I said last week, is cross-cultural humor is difficult. We often don't understand the humor of another culture. And other times we have to make the Bible funny, or we can make the Bible funny, and that's a good thing. I was going to, cross-cultural communication. I'm old. In 1991, I was ordained. That's 32 years ago I was ordained. And at the time, I was single and living with my parents. So I had to drive a little bit of ways to my first call before I was able to buy a house for like the first 3 months till I bought a house. And there was a lady in the congregation named Alice Christensen. And Alice was sort of the grand old lady of that congregation. She was in charge of the funeral lunches, And so Alice, she calls and she goes, rather than driving home on Wednesday night, would you like to come over? Did I tell this story last week? I told this recently. I was sure I didn't, but then you start looking around, and people are, all right. So this is cultural communication among Norwegians. She says, Rather than driving home on Wednesday, why don't you come over? I'll make you dinner, and then you can go teach confirmation. I said, sure. So I went over to her house Wednesday. Her husband had recently died before I got, in the past year. So I was over, she cooked, we had dinner, and she said, well, when Dave Wold was in seminary doing, over at St. Tim's, helping out with the youth, he used to come every Wednesday. Now, that is Norwegian for I warmly invite you to come every Wednesday. And I knew that to be the case. So the next following Monday, I was in church, and the secretary goes, Alice is on the phone. She wants to talk to you. I picked up the phone, and she goes, are you coming? I said, yep, okay. And she hung up, right? That's how Norwegians communicate. And so, right, culturally, we all have our ways of doing things, and that's why I think sometimes we do miss a lot of humor, and I assume I still miss a lot of humor in the Bible simply because I'm not a member of the original culture that produced this literature. By the way, Alice, I would say, can I help with the dishes? Can I help in any way? And she'd say, nope, this is a one-butt kitchen. These small little post-World War II houses in the post-World War II. Most of the houses were built in the neighborhood on the GI Bill right after the war. If you remember what those houses are like, maybe you grew up in one, or maybe your first house was one of those. But I always thought that was a good line about the one-butt kitchen. All right, let me stop. Believe it or not, it's 10:45. Comments or questions? No. It does not refer to Jesus laughing, but I cannot imagine that Jesus did not laugh. I cannot imagine that some of the parables that he told had humorous elements in that culture. I think, did I talk last week about the wine at Cana? Okay. So the first miracle story in Mark is something useful, right? Healing, casting out a demon. The first miracle story in John is turning these huge vats of water into wine. What do you think that's about? Well, it means Jesus liked a good time at a wedding, so that the wedding feast was a joyful celebration. I think the salvation there is that Jesus saved the family from the shame of being the family that would be forever known in that little town as the family at whose wedding the wine ran out. Because in addition to being a culture of hospitality, the ancient world was a world of honor and shame. And I can come talk about that another time, but shame was a public value, and it stuck to households, not just individuals. So I think for me, that's what that story is about. Two friends of mine got married, and the preacher who recently died, was a very famous Lutheran preacher. He went up to read the gospel and preach at this particular wedding, and he got up there, and there was no Bible in the pulpit, and he hadn't brought one. But of course, because we are also a culture of shame, he didn't want to be embarrassed. So he just told the wedding story at Cana for memory. And it was way better, right? Because he was telling the story, not reading it. And then he says, Hans and Christian, this is the sort of God you have. Look what Jesus does. Once Jesus starts to giving you good things, he doesn't even know when to stop. I mean, look how much wine he gave. And my guess is, like a lot of churches in those days, like the church that I worked for at that time, at weddings, you could have one champagne toast. That was it. And he said, look, he gives this wedding party wine, and not just enough for a little champagne toast, enough to get the whole wedding party in serious trouble. But that's the kind of God we have, the God of joy, who gives us good things. Other comments? I think so. I mean, I think mostly the issue is with today's the translators. So one of the euphemisms for, so you get euphemisms for sex, like the verb yitzak. You get euphemisms for human elimination. So one of them is to, I gotta get this right, to cover one's feet is a euphemism for going to the bathroom, because you've got a robe on and you drop the robe and it covers your feet. But feet in the Old Testament, not in the New Testament, in the Old Testament, feet is a euphemism for genitals. So to uncover the feet, now we're not talking about feet, we're talking about feet. Uncover the feet is a euphemism for sex. So in the story of Ruth, right, it's the festival of booths in the fall, and Naomi says, here's what you're going to do. You're going to wait till Boaz has finished his celebration, right? And then you're going to go in and uncover his feet, it says. And your translation goes to great lengths to make sure you don't know that. Even the paraphrases, right, the so-called paraphrases, which are explain these things, when it gets there, Eugene Peterson in The Message, best paraphraser is, best sort of dynamic translation, he stays way away from reality. But that's why you need pastors who will tell you what those things mean. All right. Other comments or questions? I do want to hit on this last point that I made last week, that our ability to laugh in the midst of an extremely broken world is a witness to our hope in that God's future, God's preferred future, will be better, and that preferred future breaks into the now in the work of the Holy Spirit. So our ability to laugh, I think, even in the midst of suffering, even in the midst of death, is witness to the Holy Spirit. I talked about a little bit about this last week, but this is why I'm assuming this is why, as I said last week, at funerals we do come downstairs and then we gather at tables and we tell stories and we laugh and we cry and we share those memories, right? It's part of our Christian hope. Other comments or rebuttals in the form of, I think I said this last week, I always like the rebuttals that are in the form of questions. Yep. Well, that's what the Jews do. So, I mean, yes, a Shakespearean comedy, there is, in most of Shakespeare's comedy, there actually is really funny stuff. It's just that we don't speak Elizabethan English anymore, and so we're working so hard to understand. But the definition of comedy, like as I said, like in Greek, it's just like in a tragedy, everybody dies except one person who then gives the last monologue explaining, human nature, basically. But in the comedy, it ends well. Esther is like that, but Haman dies on his own gibbet, right? So, as we would say in English, he gets hoisted on his own petard, right? Or, how else do we say that? You know, that is right. The thing he intends for other people, he gets.
Well, the joke is on him.
Yeah, the joke's on him is the point. Yeah, right? So it's only comedy in that sense, but there are comic elements about it. Like, for instance, okay, notice how it starts. I got to open the book of Esther again. Hold on, this will take just a second. I got it right here. So listen to this. This happened in the days of Ahasuerus. I'm just going to say King A. This happened in the days of King A, the same King A who ruled over 127 provinces. In those days when King A sat on his royal throne in the citadel of Susa, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his officials and ministers. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and the governors of the provinces were present. And while he displayed the great wealth and the splendor of his majesty for many days, 180, he throws a feast that lasts 180 days. That's half a year. Right? I mean, so the comic element there is the exaggeration. The size of the gibbet, the length of his feast, but then he's dangerous. So he orders at the end, he orders Queen Vashti to come in so he can, present her to his guys, and she refuses to go, right? And because she's right. The story here is, right, the king's an idiot, but even kings who are idiots are really dangerous people, is part of the story. And so that's why you get both these exaggerations in the story, but serious. If you don't believe that, I'm not political in the sense of I don't have a party. I used to have a party, but most of my friends used to have a political party, but we all left them because they're all ruled by idiots now. That's just what I think. Don't write any letters. Right? They used to say, there's pick your. There's a village in Arkansas, or there's a village in Texas that's missing its idiot. We would hear when our president. Did you see those bumper stickers ever? Right? Yeah. So when Bush or Clinton were presidents, you'd see bumper stickers. There's a village in Texas that's missing its idiot, or Arkansas. But even when our presidents maybe are not very smart, they're still really dangerous. I mean, Putin is a really dangerous person, right? Vladimir Putin is a really dangerous person. And I can guarantee you, he does not allow the comedy clubs in Russia to make fun of him, right? It's one of the great things about our society is that the freedom of speech extends to comedians and to preachers who are not supposed to be funny. That's not their job. Their job is to preach the gospel. Oh, okay. Other comments or questions? Have you, I'm just trying to think, there's too many things come to mind, but about how in the hospital room, one of the ways that I know that the Holy Spirit is actually at large, right, wild in the neighborhood, is my experience around deathbeds. So maybe you don't know this, but most of us don't like to be around most human beings don't like to be around other human beings who are in deep pain. Most of us don't want, especially if the pain is spiritual or psychic and not just physical. So I've been a pastor for 32 years. I still don't like to go into deathbed rooms. But every pastor I know will tell you this story 100 times. I thought I was supposed to minister to them, but when I left, I felt they had ministered to me. And maybe you thought the same thing. Maybe you went to some friend or relative after some tragedy, and you thought your job was to be the one giving care, and you left feeling you had received care, right? That's because the Holy Spirit was there ahead of you. And you weren't bringing the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit was already there, the Spirit of Jesus. And I've experienced that so many times that I now count on it. I realize it's not my job to bring God, because God's ahead of me. But it is my job maybe to name God, in case folks don't know how to. So when my father-in-law died a couple years ago, well, what year is it? I gotta think. He died, my daughter's born in 99, 17, he died in 16. 2016. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the help with math. And my only job was to be, I'm the son-in-law, but I'm also the professional person who knows about mourning and grief and death. And my job was only to be able to name what was happening amidst all the laughter and all the tears. All right, well, I'm going to let you go. Thank you for having me. Appreciate the attention.